You're in the Forum 24, and this presentation is Becoming the $6 Million Man, presented by Gunter Ollmann.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So I'm Gunter Ollmann, and just a quick about me. I'm VP of Research at Dambala and Board of Advisors for IOActive. I've been dealing with IT security and penetration testing and red team and understanding the bad guys and being able to replicate the bad guys for way too long. And I'm going to be talking today really about the commercialization, if you like, of botnets, but more in particular the way that if you're building and running a botnet, how you actually make real money, real serious money. Yeah. But before I sort of like dive into what I'm sort of going to cover, I thought that a disclaimer was probably in order, and I found the South Park disclaimer here. That's really what I'm going to cover is really looking at what the bad guys tend to do, and more specifically the bad guys that actually know what they're doing and intentionally choose this as a career path. Okay, and this is based on analysis and discussions and conversations and observations of several dozen different botnet operators. And I'll tend to use the term commercial botnet operators because this is their business. Okay. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a bit of background about the business model, what sort of sits behind there, what are some of the thoughts and the way that people go about deciding that they're going into botnets and botnet building, and then really look at 2 or 3 key schemes that are being used for actually monetizing the bots and being able to extract maximum value out of the botnets themselves. So, what is the talk? First of all, I'm really coming about understanding the profession, demystifying the sophistication of this particular type of threat, examining the monetization models. But what this talk isn't about intentionally is it's not meant to be a how-to guide on how to build a better botnet, and it's not meant to be a how-to guide on how to be a better online cyber criminal. Okay. Let's get the ball rolling. I think, so botnets really aren't as scary, difficult, or even illegal as many people think. Okay, and the botnets really have become, just a tool for actually launching attacks and actually making serious money. But you need to understand that the botnets themselves, it's not a case of assembling all the little parts, a little bit of a Lego pile, and then having a botnet. There is a bit of a skill and mastery in being able to take all those parts, all those components, and actually turn it into a work of art, if you like. Now, when I was looking at what the bad guys, the guys that are already getting involved in this, doing this commercially, and sort of tracking back and keeping up some of the conversations with them, what sort of drives them or what sort of drove them. And many of them are actually interesting enough, have attended Blackhat, attended some of the training courses and other things around the world, and have chosen this as a profession. And many of them have picked sunny, idyllic countries, work from home, and really sort of build up their business. And so if you look at what their goals are, it really is build. They have an objective of making as much money as possible and to retire in those countries, in those areas, very well off. And so you end up really looking at how do you build up a business plan for this. And it's pretty simple. You have to build a business plan for you building your business plan of botnets. You have to execute the business plan. It's pretty important that you actually avoid attention for these types of botnets. And, again, for your business plan, I want to retire early, launching these. But how much of this is actually criminal? And, I think a key part here is which country you're in pretty much determines whether or not, what you're doing is illegal or not. So many countries around the world, botnets may or may not be illegal. In fact, most of the countries that I've been looking at actually owning or running a botnet is not illegal. Okay. Now, infecting and having unauthorized access to a victim machine may be more illegal than in some other countries, but not necessarily illegal in all countries. Much of the time when you have a look at successful prosecutions against botnet operators is not so much about how big their botnet was or the fact that they had unauthorized access into computers. Most of the prosecutions, the successful prosecutions, actually focus on the financial fraud, the credit card fraud, and the other monetary transactions, because that legal and that legislation is a lot easier to prosecute against. Now, when it comes to building botnets for fun and profit, you don't actually need to be a hardcore criminal. There are plenty of tools, guides, how-tos, vendors, and sponsors for developing botnets. If you want to go and learn about the latest kits, the latest ways of building fast-growing botnets and ensuring that you're capable of defeating the host-based defensive systems, try typing a few keywords into YouTube and you will find literally thousands and thousands of professional operators that will provide a mentor-type system for you developing and building up your botnet. And they will also show you their latest tools, which you can purchase for nominal values of a few $100s, or maybe a rent-to-own, where you can borrow some of their computer systems, part of their botnets, and grow that botnet, and you pass back a percentage of your earnings. The key thing really is, this really is just a business like any other. Now, as a newbie botnet operator or a bot master, there's a couple of codes that you sort of want to try follow. So number one is don't get caught. Fairly obvious, but you need to take and looking at the successful operators. That really starts from day one. Even when they're looking on YouTube and looking for advice on how to find the right tools, where to build their botnets and grow these botnets. Extreme care is taken to make sure that none of that very early on stage reconnaissance can ever be tracked back to the actual individual themselves. Okay. And from my side, when we're looking at tracking the bad guys who are actually running these botnets, more often than not, the way that we actually identify them and track them back to who they physically are is mostly because of what happens and what they did in the first few weeks of their construction of their botnets and as they're learning how to build botnets. So any mistakes and leaks at the beginning are fatal for the botnet operators. Okay. Another one for speaking with these guys, a lot of them do see it purely as a business, and they don't want to be criminals. Okay. And so there is a code of ethics, very flexible code of ethics in professional botnet building. And many of them, if I look at what they want to do, they don't want to do criminal harm. So that tends to mean that they don't want to be involved in wars or any sort of deeply political events. However, given enough money or influence, they are more than happy rent out their botnets to those particular organizations if necessary. They typically don't want to cause any type of deaths, and they generally don't want to get in bed with organized crime. However, as they tend to develop their botnets after a few months or later stages of a year, then they will be more open to actually using organized crime as customers as they rent or borrow parts of their botnets. So key things to remember when it comes to botnets. So resilience is damned important. Okay, so all these things about having command and control and having one server and serving up all the content and taking back all the details and that doesn't really exist anymore. Apart from the very newbie guides and you're doing your first proof of concept botnets. Botnets today, in any construction, are highly resilient to takedown. Okay. Botnets themselves are just the tool. Okay. Compromising machines is one thing, installing a piece of malware another thing, but frankly, if you want to actually do anything and actually make any real money, then the botnet itself is just the tool. The tools can become very advanced, but it's all an aid to actually monetizing access to those systems. Of course, the last thing, of course, is you want to be rich, but as part of being rich, you want to retire rich and not in jail. So when it comes to connecting to command and control, Generally, there is quite a big separation between work and pleasure. So many of the times when we're looking at these guys, they'll have entirely separate systems, typically laptops, dedicated laptops that they've built just for accessing the command and control. Okay. A key feature of that and the rigor that they go about building their business is untraceability. So a lot of times you'll see standard tool sets of changing the MAC address regularly, using different web browsers, separate base install machines so there's no additional applications that can be traced back to the actual operator themselves. And of course encrypting all the command and control traffic. So this is the command and control traffic line between the operator and the command and control servers. And generally most of that is now asymmetric key encryption. Another part, deniability is important. So open Wi-Fi is your friend when it comes to this. Okay, and there's plenty of guides and a lot of mentorship focus on the fact that where are the best Wi-Fi spots, in particular which Wi-Fi spots do not have closed-circuit TV monitoring of people using their services. Another key one, don't ever connect directly. Okay, and if you look at some of the prosecutions or attempted prosecutions earlier this year on things like the Mariposa botnet groups and that, all the tracking back and attribution to the operators has really been because they were negligent once or twice, despite trying to follow their best rigor. They messed up once or twice, and that's actually what led to tracking them down. Another key one, key piece of advice really has been hiding in the masses. So academic networks, libraries, these types of venues are ideal spots for connecting. On the command and control side, so free Wi-Fi access points are ideal, and there's a lot of advice about which particular tools you can use for automatically changing the MAC address, for example, of your computer system. So imagine that you've got a couple of laptops that are purely used for your connection to command and control, and those laptops will be used for Wi-Fi, going to free Wi-Fi spots, and moving between the different sites, and constantly changing the MAC address. So again, it can't be tracked back to the individual. Now, the money framework is important as well. So, as you're building, your first stage botnets and really, growing those botnets into, full-fledged businesses, a difficult part is actually dealing with the seed money. Okay, so once you have a particular botnet running, then it becomes a lot easier and a lot more efficient to do things, to acquire services, and to effectively monetize the botnet a lot faster. However, you need a certain degree of seed money. Okay, and so things like rebate cards and rebate systems are perfect. However, they become a little bit harder to actually cash in online. So credit card rebate cards and gift cards tend to be the preferred way of actually getting that initial seed funding for your organization. And it's not typically theft. It's not, that seed money isn't typically done through theft or fraud to begin with. Payment for initial services, so looking at services for hosting your DNS, hosting your web services, your anonymization services and things like that, proxies and hosting. That's where you're going to use up most of your seed money there. The toolkits themselves, if you're okay with a little bit of piracy, then frankly you can download many of the kits today for free. However, I think when I look at a lot of the operators that are actually developing the kits themselves, so the DIY kits for building botnets, managing botnets, and infecting machines, many of them actually provide these light versions for free, or distribute them freely with the general hope that people will upgrade and pay for the fully fledged version. So, getting access to, gift cards, in particular, the credit cards that can be used online untraceable are very, very easy. Of course, a quick search online will reveal plenty of sites from all the major credit card vendors and the banks themselves, and you can generate your gift card and it can be sent to your address. You do not need to specify that it's your home address, and many of these types of portals will actually allow you to pay via PayPal or other types of, or Western Union type transactions. So there is a gap in being able to track back how this initial seed money actually gets generated. And there's also a level of deniability if anyone sort of tracks it back to a particular gift card, then it becomes very easy to sort of say, well, actually it was delivered to my address as a gift, so I have no idea where it actually came from, I just used it. Now, foreign bank accounts is an important part. So, if you're going to go beyond botnets that are just focused on spam and DDoS and things like that, and actually, seeking to make literally millions of dollars, the key feature really is, how am I going to be able to take all that information, all the monies that are being generated from fraud purposes or for other online systems where I am selling or doing other transactions of the data that's being stolen from the bot victims. How do I get that back into a real bank account? Now, it's not like you really want to use your home banking online services and your ATM machine to try bring the money back. So looking at foreign banking accounts, so many of the guys, and there's plenty of advice on really where the best places are to open up foreign bank accounts. And looking at, three an example. So one that gets talked about an awful lot about Swiss numbered accounts. Frankly, Swiss numbered accounts don't really exist anymore. It's actually all traceable back to the people themselves. So there are alternative versions that go by a little bit of the name of the Swiss numbered accounts, but you have to go in person to the banks themselves and open up, and you have to validate who you are. Meanwhile, other things like the Cayman accounts, you can actually open up the accounts online. And one of the interesting ones I was looking at was the Panama Bearer Share Corporation accounts. So you can actually set up online remotely a licensed corporate entity in Panama, which comes with a bank account. Because of their banking regulations, that is never attributable back to the person who actually set up the organization. But there are bilateral agreements. So when it comes to particular types of frauds, regardless of all these types of numbered accounts or anonymous accounts, all the details about those accounts and the holding of the monies that are inside those accounts can be frozen based on bilateral agreements covering the fraud between the different countries, which will result in disclosure of the owners and also means that, as a bad guy, you want to stay away from the classic fraud techniques. All of these types of accounts also come with credit cards and online banking capabilities, so all the things that you need. And of course, when it comes to retirement planning, if you're based in the US, there are plenty of countries that have non-extradition, and highlighted a few countries there are probably more amenable to a good, a high standard of living once you actually move there. On the business plan side, when I was looking at this particular topic, building the $6 million man, more from the cybernetics side, if you like, and things, taking a one-year snapshot and looking at how many of these organizations have built up their botnets and their businesses, that first year is pretty much crucial to them. And when you have a closer look, it's pretty much standard sort of MBA business development, advice that you'll see and the types of plans that they evolve there. So if you're looking at something like, $6 million, and, you could follow a quarterly plan, then really what you see is this, each quarter, you double your revenue opportunity and you gradually increase your revenue, increase your margin. And when you look at the early stages, they're actually building the botnets and bringing in the money is actually fairly low. There are high costs, high cost of goods, if you like, building that particular first botnets. But as you build a botnet on top of a botnet, then you start to become your own service provider for many of the features, which reduces the cost of actually running those botnets. So if you work out aiming for about $6 million in revenue, then the common sort of turnaround for the guys that are actually running this is $1.25 million after not so much taxes, but all the other costs of providing services. But when it comes to getting started in the botnets, it's really about courage. It's not really for the faint-hearted getting involved and getting started in the botnet business. And many of the guys that got started in the botnet businesses were that have met have become, have been disenchanted with, their professional careers as sysadmins or pen testers or QSAs. So looking at the very first botnet that these guys tend to build, they tend to start off with an off-the-shelf DIY construction kit, so things like Zeus, SpyEye, Butterfly, names can go on. And one of the easiest ways to really test the waters in building a botnet really are things about seeding torrents and news groups. So they're low volume, and it's a slow way of building up the botnets. However, they are very reliable. Key features, though, anonymous submission is very difficult to trace back. It doesn't rely on any type of hosting infrastructure, so there's no cost to you once you've uploaded your particular malware. And there's a natural propagation infection, and actually, most of your victims from this particular vector are, ideal candidates for having home systems that are up for long hours and are in general poor states of health and are very easy to manipulate and use as reliable building blocks for more sophisticated botnets. And of course, a key feature for these first botnets are making use of free services. So dynamic DNS and all the providers are ideal for command and control in these early stages, as they allow for free and anonymous DNS hosting. Now, I wanted to quickly just show one of the kits. So this is a SpyEye, and the top left is the part of the management console, version 1.2. And of course, it comes with all the default features, all the statistics, the ability to upload and download new commands and new malware to all of the infected hosts as part of your botnet. It also has other interesting features from a fraud perspective of automatic screen grabbing, which has its own scripting language to decide on which particular parts of screens and web pages are being monitored. Bank of America grabber here for credentials, and also certificate grabbers, so for the stealing of client-side certificates, VPN credentials. It also comes with a whole management console, and here we see on the right-hand side a list of all the countries and the victims in this particular botnet, and also tracks what version of the malware is actually distributed on there. So you can make sure that all the hosts and all the victims of the botnet receive the latest updates. And the bottom left here is one of the newer consoles, or a flavor of the SpyEye consoles that we're seeing hanging around today. So there's sort of a change of icons as different operators tune their management consoles and provide additional value-add services. Now, the hierarchy for these early botnets, these first starter botnets, is pretty simple. Multiple command and control servers. The botnet agent, is typically communicating over HTTP, and the service is paid for via the reward and rebate cards. Now, when you look at the flow of information, so you have your bot master, the guy running the laptop in the local Starbucks, changing their MAC address every couple of hours or something, or changing operations. Doing it by free Wi-Fi, connecting to anonymous services, Tor networks, or making use of free and leased anonymizing botnets or anonymizing services, then connecting to those command and control servers. Now, the conversation between the bot master and those first tier command and control servers are all encrypted. On the other side, so from those command and control servers now communicating with the botnets, which may or may not be encrypted. In fact, most of the time what we'll see is that there's no need to actually encrypt the communication between the victim machines, the bot agents, and the command and control server. Instead, what happens is that the files and configuration files and any communications are actually encrypted on the host, on the victim machine, and then they're shuffled up through HTTP. So there's no need for encrypting the actual channel itself. The advantage of that is that you don't get caught by filtering technologies, and it's a lot harder to spot once it's hidden in general HTTP traffic. Now, the infection rates vary, and now I've picked some idealized version just to sort of represent, provide a graphic representation of the different techniques for growing and building botnets. So I think when you talk about drive-by downloads, so drive-by downloads get an awful lot of press, and everyone's very worried about the drive-by downloads as an infection vector. And when you look at how it's used for building botnets, then actually it has a slow ramp in actually infecting hosts. And by the time it starts, coming up to a very good rate of infecting hosts and building up victims, it tends to get noticed and shut down. And because you're reliant on a web service, once it's shut down, then you lose all control of that botnet of all those agents, and so there's no more further infection. Meanwhile, things like the spam URLs or spam attachments have a lot longer life cycle. They're easier to detect. They have lower yields on infections, but they do tend to last a lot longer, and they can't be shut off automatically. One of the ones, this red line on the bottom, which I think is interesting, has the lowest yield today, is really the instant messenger chat sessions. Because of many of the agents that are being used for distributing infectious URLs and things like that through chat messages are automated. There are bots that sit inside those channels, but they're also using, there are bots that sit on victim machines and inject content into the instant messenger messages that the real human is actually using. And so there's a high social engineering coefficient on that, which means that it tends to last for a very, very long time. It's very difficult to shut off. A key feature, though, if you actually want and need to grow your botnet business, is all about reputation. So, like I said, the botnets are just the tool. Now, getting access and being able to do things and actually monetizing the larger parts of the botnet and botnet services means that you need to have a reputation underground. Okay, so the reputation is based on peer trust. Okay. And to be able to establish that, you need to be a frequent user and a poster on various hacking and botnet forums, and you need to be able to provide a lot of free stuff originally to sort of build up their reputation. Getting away, so many of these forums will be in various language, foreign countries, but frankly it doesn't really matter if you use Google Translator because everyone speaks poor local language no matter what. And no one really minds too much the fact that you can't speak the local language, and there's a lot of Google Translator being used in these forums. So language is not so much a problem with actually dealing with these forums and actually building up the reputations. You'll also find, as you build up the reputation, you'll have better access to particular types of tools and technologies for enhancing your botnet and the malware that's actually there. A key thing also about building up the reputation means that it opens up a few more routes to and how you're actually going to pay for services. So a lot of things will focus on non-revocable money transfers, so Western Union type stuff, volumes of stolen credentials. So the things that you're actually stealing from the botnet become a bartering currency. And of course the botnet itself, so segmenting those up. And so, when you go to many of these types of sites and start digging down, everything's like star rated. So, you build up your reputation, and you can validate particular people that you're going to be doing business with based on their reputation, and if you like, many of the endorsements that are being provided there. But it's also important that you have to build up the reputation to be able to access certain areas and certain forums and access certain types of tools. So many of these types of forums typically start off with just a number of postings, and some of the postings can be quite high. So many of the the Balkan area Russian-speaking forums will have like a threshold of about 100 posts before you can actually see any of the sort of botnet-related talk, and about 500 to 1,000 posts on these boards before you can get into any of the monetization, any of the carding forums, or any of the data transfer forums. So once you've sort of moved on to that first generation botnet, and the botnet grows, there's new demands. So more botnets, more spreading, more detection. So it becomes more important about how you're actually deploying botnets and the agents themselves. So the malware also becomes more sophisticated, adding more features. So pulling back stored data, key logging, keyword sniffing, harvesting more data, and particular data that is saleable. We see an awful lot in the press about stealing Facebook credentials, login credentials, and all those, and they have a value. But frankly, looking at the classic email addresses and anything else that provide personal identifiable information actually has a growing value, and I'll spend a fair bit of time actually talking at the how that personal information is actually monetized. So the malware components become more and more important, so the operators tend to spend more and more money actually on the malware and the malware generation techniques. And a key feature of this is really releasing more malware faster, and a key process then becomes the serial variant process, so creating new variants of the malware continuously. So one model for making money from botnets is really about build to sell models. It's the easiest one to actually get involved in. So key factors in building botnets and build to sell models. The structure of the botnet is important, so a hierarchical structure where you can break up parts of the botnets and resell and provide multiple operational use. The reputation, past use and history of the botnet is important. Location of the botnet victims, the robustness of the malware agent, and the reputation, your own reputation within the seller forums. Once you build up those botnets, pre-processing of the botnets, so splitting, clustering, and organizing all the victim collections is important, because that's going to provide how you associate value for those sections of the botnets, as well as synchronizing the malware to different command and control channels. So everyday access to botnets. So if you look at botnets in the range of 100,000 to 2 million bots, rental is about $200 for a 24-hour use at the lower end of the 100,000 bot agents. And pricing seems to be $50K, seems to be a common number that's sort of thrown around for getting access and taking full ownership of 100,000 plus type botnets. But still, much of this is still based on build-it-yourself kits, and when I look at many of the botnet operators, the guys that actually have interactive control and build the businesses this way actually are not malware authors, are not reverse engineers, and the malware is an important part, and they will invest in people that will provide those services to them, but they won't actually be involved in actually creating the malware itself. And of course, buying the botnets, and I think things have changed quite a bit. So here's a shot from 2007 on sort of pricing, and here you see bot victims by the thousands. So Australian victims, so 1,000 bot agents for $300. Okay. As you sort of move down the different countries, the different ratings, and that's this particular site is dead, long gone. But what we found is that the value of the botnets has actually been increasing. So originally I sort of thought that as the years go by, the botnets become more of a commodity, the value goes down. Well, actually the value of the bots and the bot agents is going up. Now, if you don't want to buy the botnets exclusively, then many of the services will have a online service where you rent a section of that particular botnet. So you buy 1,000 or buy 2,000. And you can select which particular countries or which particular assets that will be under your control, and then you'll have them for a fixed period of time, and then you pass them back after you use. So moving a little bit faster, advancing the malware and the command and control. So unique malware updates and daily updates of the binary is important. QA assurance, so in guaranteeing that even before that piece of malware leaves your computer and goes out to all the victim machines, can be almost practically guaranteed that it will have zero detection on mainstream antivirus because of the QA process and effectively checking to make sure that it's undetectable before it's released. Another part is about network propagation. So, 3 years plus, much of the botnet building was based on worming features and worming functions. And you still see that. The volume hasn't gone down, but however, the percentage of worming features actually in use for building bots and botnets has decreased. And the preference has been more targeted infection of hosts as opposed to blind worms just navigating networks. Key reasons for that really is that network detection of worming capabilities and worming features have become mainstream and pretty much standard in all enterprise or large-scale detection systems. And so serial variant production, so there are plenty of providers and service providers that will take your piece of malware or your malware requirements and we'll create 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 new variants, unique variants of your piece of malware or your malware requirements, and generate that for you on your behalf for a very small fee. Okay. Now, all this is really done for a reason, and I wanted to quickly step through some of the features that you'll see in contemporary botnets and botnet building. So you have a victim machine surfing the web, hits a drive-by download sites. Okay, so it gets exploited, and as part of that exploit, we'll be pointing to a foreign site. A different site will actually host the malware. So there'll be a request that comes back to the host, to the victim machine, to say, I'll pull down this file. So this file may be called a dropper or a downloader. On the machine, on the computer, the victim's machine, unloads, unpacks itself. There are multiple files. They may or may not be binary files. Often they have scripting language, script files in there, which is all part of the cleanup process. It starts one of the malware agents, and what you'll see is that it will try to reach out to the internet, but not so reach out to the internet. And last year and a year before, it would just reach out to see whether or not it could get to Google or something like that, and see if there's an internet connection. Okay, part of that is to make sure that it's not the piece of malware hasn't been caught by an automated analysis system, and that there's not a good guy looking to investigate that. And of course, the good guy said, well, actually, we'll have a whitelist of the sites that you can go to. So Google will Google results will come back to the victim machine, and then they'll try to connect out to their command and control. Now they do a mix of whitelist to grey list, and sites that are bad-ish, but it's definitely not command and control. Now, once it gets that validation, the malware then moves on to the second stage. So while it was getting that validation of internet access, it's already created a local file which contains all of the saleable information, such as email addresses, any identity, password theft, anything that's stored or remembered by your web browsers are all collected, compressed, put into a file, encrypted, and then passed up to the update site. The update site also provides, maybe one or multiple update sites will actually have the real bot agents. So the real, the actual bot agent that's going to be used as part of the botnet. So that comes down, it unpacks itself, and actually, part of this process, it actually removes all the things that led up to that bot agent. So all the things about, checking to see the internet connection, disabling antivirus, doing other things at the host level to make sure that your bot agent is going to be robust, all is cleaned up. So all the evidence trail is removed at that stage. And once that particular bot agent is now installed and everything else is cleaned up, it'll then reach out to the command and control, and then you'll start seeing the real interesting monetization of the victims. So when I look at taking the stolen data itself, so payment and growth. So payment of disposable services is important. So investing in systems will typically make use of free accounts, free payment accounts, And so once you've sort of built up that first stage of pulling down the personalized account details, you start seeing the personal information actually being used as a growth vector or an infection vector for building up the botnet. So you see that the email addresses will be used and sent locally for social engineering purposes, which has a higher yield. Now, I want to sort of step into the different sort of area and really look at the different ways that people are actually making money from this. And one of the ones I wanted to look at is really, spear phishing services as a business. So, you hear an awful lot about, targeted attacks, targeted spear phishing, and, why me? Why did they get me? And all this sort of stuff. Well, frankly, spear phishing, especially against corporate entities, is actually very, very easy. Access to all the lists of key candidates, who the CEO is, CFO, and all that is available online. Generally, much of this information is free, and it becomes very easy to personalize the attacks. Now, if you actually have a bot agent that's managed to infiltrate the corporate network, then accessing their internal mail system, the enterprise mail systems, is a great treasure trove. So it becomes very easy to enumerate all of the employees as well as their job titles. And if you think of things like a Microsoft Exchange server, if it's all been set up with Active Directory, it also has their cell phones, their home email address counts, everything. Now, all of that information, what you'll see is be pulled back, processed into list formats, and then these lists are then available to the market. Okay, and so three types of sort of lists. So black lists, grey lists, and white lists. So black lists tend to be acquired from underground forums. Grey lists, these sellers that you're not quite sure. They probably have Blackhat ties, but you're not quite sure. And there's no way you can prove one way or the other. And then you have the white, the commercial leads vendors. So much of the things that corporate marketing teams will reach out and have a constant flow of information. All the data is conveniently processed, CVS formats, standardized versions, and all this is integratable into all the standard tools for spam campaigns and other automation tasks. Now, when it comes to targeted delivery, the botnets make it a much easier task to actually get this targeted delivery. So targeted messaging, so being able to take and process those lists and launch large campaigns or multiple rolling campaigns against organizations. The botnets also provide the hosting facilities for the malware and the affected computers. Allows you to enumerate the target organization through port scannings and other types of passive observation. And also becomes the mechanism for selling the bots that are installed inside that organization. When I looked at things like whaling, so going for the CEO or the key guys at the top of the pyramid inside the organizations, they're typically associated as high-cost targets. But interesting enough, the value for services, so finding guys that will take their botnets and monetize, and if you specify a particular organization or a particular class of CEO, for example, then the types of costs that you will see being charged back to you are somewhere between $500 and $100,000. I think that much of these higher-end ones, the $100,000 type things, are just current generation script kiddies, talking about it when I'm actually delivering. Now, many of the reputation type star ratings and things like that, you'll see that a typical value placed on this type of service going after CEOs, CFOs, and named organizations, will tend to go for about $1,000 to $2,000 per access. Now, horizontal spear phishing, so looking at a particular class of people or profession within multiple organizations is interesting. Multiple organizational targets actually make it a little bit easier for the botnet campaigns. So there's a lot of tuning in the messaging and tuning of the campaign. And the results is based on the number of victims, victim machines inside those organizations belonging to these guys. And so typical value per head, somewhere between $20 and $200 per head. Now, vertical spear phishing, so breaking into the organization, then gradually enumerating and working your way up inside the organization to find key data assets as opposed to positions and roles. Unfortunately, I couldn't really get a good feel for what the current rates are. It seems to be more of a day rate, if you like, and an effort rate as opposed to what the total volume is. So what you'll see are typical rates of if you're after a particular type of information from an organization, then the day rates will be in the $1,000, $500 to $1,500. So on par with standard consulting services, if you like. Now, I've made mention a few times of campaigns, and what I'm really talking about here is that there is a common myth that botnet operator equals owner and operator of a botnet. That's not true. Okay, so botnet operators, botmasters run multiple botnets. Okay, even the largest ones that you'll hear about of millions of victims around the world, and that will be operating as multiple botnets, and it becomes a little bit difficult, a little bit harder to separate the different campaigns. So, reasons for going down this process means that you don't want to lose everything in one go. If someone severs all your command and control, you don't want to lose your entire business overnight. Multiple campaigns also increase the probability of being successful inside attacking organizations, so you can do multiple waves of attacks, multiple vectors, multiple themes with different payloads. And generally on these sort of campaigns, it's okay to infect machines multiple times. And so when it comes to the campaigns themselves, what you'll see is that you'll have a group or cluster of distribution points, and those services may run in multiple campaigns themselves as well. And the campaigns themselves can be very sophisticated. Some of the operators that I've seen and observed will run maybe 3 to 5 campaigns per day, and those campaigns may last for 1 day to 5 days before they keep on rolling these things through. And what that means is that there are multiple delivery vehicles which have different yields and different results depending on the organizations and they get hits and the type of victims that are there. So you'll see, same botnet operator using the same distribution channels, also picking different themes. Okay, so you'll see particular Adobe updates, fake MS updates, fake AV, all campaigns being run simultaneously from the same services. And you also see, the redirection to multiple sites actually providing different infections. So once the host is infected, it receives a new URL to download the piece of malware, and they may actually be shuffling through multiple download sites and, if you like, round-robining their customers and providing botnet victims to those customers. And when it comes to the botnets themselves and sort of building, really it's an evolution of campaigns. So over time there'll be multiple campaigns. They'll run, they'll overlap with each other. And the goal of the campaigns is to keep a steady flow of new infections and growing the sort of botnets. So a typical sort of thing that you'll see if a target, and a common figure thrown around is about 25,000 new bot infections per week. And these are not just not infections of a piece of malware that made it to a host, but actually successfully connected to command and control and became part of the botnet. So you want to grow that sort of rate of about 25,000. The cost of doing that and providing that as a service lies between about $1,000 to $5,000 per week. And the cost of operating that yourself, if you're running between 2 to 5 campaigns and just doing drive-by download sites, then each campaign will have between 2 to 50 different sites or serving URLs, and the cost of that is about $200. So, obviously, if you're selling that service at $1,000 and your cost is $200, then there's a good markup going on in this process. Now, once you've got that 25,000 new victims per day, frankly, one of the easiest ways in the early stages, pay per install. And for every one of those victim machines, you can make between 30 cents and $3, $4 per install on those victims. However, it becomes quite hard to actually make a lot of money from these because they are these types of sites that the guys that are providing the pay per install services get a little bit suspicious if you start generating costing them $50,000 per week in new installs. They get a little bit suspicious. So looking at a different way of actually making the money on there. So one of the things that you'll see an awful lot is about affiliate web marketing and spam campaigns. Now, there are a lot of several botnets that specialize in spam, but as a would-be botnet operator that actually wants to make real money, spam is pretty easy. It's a default action in all the different malware agents. And a botnet of 10,000 victims will allow you to send 100 million plus messages per day, and maybe 5 million malware type messages per day. But it's also pretty hard. 80% of spam today is generated by few 100 hardcore gangs. Okay, they're tracked, they're well understood. And it's pretty much it's a cutthroat type of business. So it's not a place that would-be botnet operators start out. So many of the spam operators have been doing this and using the botnets for spam or building spam-based botnets for a long time. Okay, so it's not a business that actually really gets started in, particularly for the faint of heart. Also, key thing is really once you have, the problem with the spam botnet is that it's very easy to detect all the victims, and so it becomes very easy to trace back and to shut down. And so you need very large botnets to sort of keep a money flow. And frankly, the money's not really there unless you can really do it on a massive, massive scale, which is very, it's something that takes years of experience to acquire and to build up. Meanwhile, you've got that botnet of 10,000 machines. Pharmacy affiliate schemes tend to be a lot easier to sort of get involved and become a much easier market for actually using your botnets and actually monetizing. Now, you could either provide those, actually run the affiliate scheme and get paid by the pharmacies themselves, or you can use your botnet as providing services to the affiliates themselves. So things like using your botnet for the mail sending from the spam sides, webmail spam sending, comment spam has been growing, and advertisement injection. So relative values. So the standard spam emails, very low value. Meanwhile, advertisement injection, so being able to substitute banner advertising inside the pages that the victims are browsing, has a high value. On the back end, providing the services to the affiliates as well of DNS and fast flux services, the web hosting of their affiliate sites and the content there, and the Blackhat SEO. Are all vehicles that you use your botnets and generate a lot more money as part of these systems. So if you look at mail delivery, 25,000 mail messages, equals about $1. Okay. Now ad injection. So every time someone clicks on one of the ads that you've injected into those victim sites or victim pages as they're rendering inside the browser, somewhere between 1 cent and 12 cents per click as cash to you. DNS services, fast flux services, somewhere between 50 cents and $20 per day for providing those types of services, depending on your reputation and the volume of traffic that's going to be generated. Affiliate hosting, somewhere between $1 and $8 per day, and Blackhat SEO, depending on whether it's a targeted campaign or whether it is just a long-running type of service, or somewhere between $1 and $500 per day per domain being used. And of course, there are plenty of the services online as well if you want to look at these things, such as iframe services. So here we see one particular provider selling or buying iframe traffic. So if you're hosting your multiple websites, or you have your injection capabilities, inject an iframe into all those sites, and for every 1,000 users, 1,000 people that visit one of the pages that you've injected your iframe, you'll earn $1. So this is yet another sort of cutthroat industry. There are many providers in here, and payouts seem to be fairly low. I made mention of advertisement substitution. So there's a growth in different types of tools that are designed to manage your bot agents and to do automatic changes of URLs. So you have the victim machine browsing the web, it will hit a page and it will see there's an add double click code inside there. It will then substitute its own code that's been defined centrally with its own banner advertisement. So you can run your own advertising campaign, advertising service on top. So one of the interesting areas, I think, is looking at other ways of monetizing the information they actually have there, but staying away from the fraud aspects. And I made mention about being able to sell email addresses and things like this. What we're seeing, though, is that there's a development of an entire identity laundering business going on now. And so you'll see the black market routes, the selling of authentication credentials, which is used for frauds, thefts, and targeted attacks. You got the grey market routes, so the family, corporate units all sold together, laundering of identities, and commercial use of that stolen information. Okay. Now, looking at sort of pricing. So imagine you got 20,000 bot victims. And you're able to go through all the emails. So you're able to retrieve all the email addresses. You can see how frequent they're used, how current the email addresses are, and dates. With 20,000 victims, it's very easy to keep a live database of maybe 150,000, 250,000 email addresses. Now, the price for actually selling and providing those email addresses is a live validated service. So being able to just take those emails and ensure that they are currently live and working will generate a little bit of money, but not an awful lot. So here we see, big lists of spam lists, 38 million email addresses for, $150. So how do you, increase the value? Now, if you're taking stolen account details, so able to, Yahoo email accounts, Facebook, all these sorts of things, it's a buyer's market, but here we even see that the value is still pretty low. So, 10,000 MySpace accounts for, $599, if you like. There are also other pieces of information that are interesting. So, on the bottom right-hand side here, one particular site is, so this is a shopping cart type site where they are selling lists of Craigslist users of their email addresses and all their login accounts and things. Okay. So here we see 500 Craigslist accounts for $60. So the more filtering and the more clustering done on the identity information that's being stolen from the botnet victims, the more opportunity there is to raise the value of the data that's being sold. We're going to raise the stakes a little bit higher. So moving beyond bulk sales of data, well, there's entire grey markets for validation of data. So email addresses, personal identities, corporate mailing lists, and hierarchy, if you like. Where you can transition from a few cents per records into a few dollars. Okay. Now, if you want to go to the next stage of actually hosting the sites themselves, and you can actually raise that from a few low dollars into high dollar amounts. But you have to be careful not to be too obvious. So what I mean from this, looking at obscuring the source of these emails and identity information. So you have the direct sales, if you like, the hacker forums, Carter forums, where you're just selling in bulk. You have the resellers, so being able to, providers that will take those bulk uploads, if you like, or if you can provide a steady stream of this information, they will then distribute it as part of telemarketing-like type lists. And the last ones are really sort of the proxy type areas where you have a list of identities. However, they provide websites that provide services for free loans or cheap loan ratings. So you see on plenty of different websites where there'll be a form about giving the latest mortgage quote or latest mortgage rates. Now, if you put one of those forms on one of your websites, you'll get paid maybe $1, $2 per day for having one of those forms. Now, for every person that types in their details onto that form and wants to find out about a mortgage or whatever, you get about $5 per person. Okay. Well, if I've got 20,000 identities and all that, I can host this form on my website, and I just keep on blasting this away. And that's what we tend to see. Now, you also get other exchanges here, so being able to take your identity information that's been stolen from the botnets and be able to pass them through lead exchange portals, where the value of the leads is actually quite high. So providing a lot of information, so being able to take that who's the owner of this particular laptop, where they're browsing, what their favorite websites are, how much money they actually have in their Bank of America account or whatever. All that information starts building up a higher value identity. And so here you'll see on these lead exchanges, those types of identities have a value of about $20 per identity. Now, the grey market ones, you'll find lots and lots of sites like this, Leads Robo. I'm not saying that this is an illegal site or anything like this, but it does start making you wonder about what sort of business model this is, where here you see a list of pre-vetted jumbo pack of leads for the US, $680, and it's a service that they'll provide on a weekly basis that we get the latest lists. And then there's also, the ability for you to become an affiliate, and you actually provide your details into the system, and you'll get paid at about 25% of what the rate is that they're actually selling it for. And there's no questions asked about what the sources of that information were. And so then you got less grey ones. So when I was talking about affiliate programs that will take banking information, so being able to take that a family unit identity information and then putting into a mortgage application or a mortgage request form and all that. There's an entire affiliate market there that's is prime and frankly being abused. And you'll see that start moving up from 1 cent or a half a cent per record up to the $3 to $5 per record. So it becomes very, very easy to actually turn that botnet of 10,000 victims into a revenue generating of about $50,000, conservatively about $50,000 per week. And pricing on the other side, so looking at doing the sort of grouped selling of information, of name, address, phone number type information. And so there's entire markets there where the prices per units start to increasing. So all these things about 50,000 Facebook accounts and all this sort of stuff. 50,000 Facebook accounts may equate to $200 on the market. Meanwhile, here 2,000 regular email accounts and a home address and phone number will rake in about about $2 or $3 per record. Now, an important part of building up and maintaining these botnets is really about the aging processes. So the identity information themselves ages very rapidly. So abuse frequency, so the bots, if they're actually being used for abuse, will decrease the value of the host, but also the value of the identities that are retrieved from that particular host. The type of abuse also has the most effect on the value. Now, if looking at those leads and the lead generation sites, the normal cost per lead is about $20. Price reduces $5 every 7 days, so there's an aging process there. Reduces in value about 20% by every single time that you sell it. So reselling the information actually decreases the value as well. Okay. Now, by breaking it down by a particular country or state, actually increases the value of those sales as well, though. Now, looking at an aging of a botnet, us looking at high level of where are the most valuable parts versus the age and noisiness. And apparently, the identity theft, while it has high value, is very short duration. So you can't actually operate those particular victims and those botnets for very long. And as you sort of move down scale, things become more noisy and the value decreases. And I think most people sort of understand that. Okay. The aging of systems is important. So how long do I retain access and extract data from those victim systems? So if I'm able to hold on to those systems longer, then I can get more value out of those systems. And by increasing the robustness of the malware agents themselves, then you'll actually increase the age that you hold onto these systems and the value of the records that are pulled from them. An area I was interested as well really is looking at virtual reputations. So given all the types of sites that are out there today, yes, you have all of your home email address, home phone number, all this sort of thing that can be sold as a legitimate identity. But actually your virtual identities and the reputation of those virtual identities has a value of its own as well, and it's becoming even more important. So botnets already provide that service of being able to copy and duplicate identities. So social networks, email relationships, family units, all that sort of stuff are interesting. Now, when you have a look at a victim machine, then it seems to be about per victim inside a botnet, there's about 2.5 virtual identities per machine on average. Now, if you want to, the botnet operators are also going into an area of actually creating their own virtual identities. And so every single victim inside that botnet will actually be able to handle somewhere between 20 and 100 virtual identities. And so what we see is now, the ability to take stolen virtual identities and the reputations and apply those identities and reputations to validate newly created and minted reputations and virtual identities. And that's really like, driving a whole new business, if you like, the virtual identities. So by being able to, use those stolen identities, you can build and attract more through social engineering, more drive spam, increase infections, and sort of grow your botnet. But you do get noticed awfully quickly, and it's not particularly scalable. But the virtual identities, so the ones that have been created completely from scratch, become their own self-reinforcing system. So being able to build a number of virtual identities, validate a number of real identities. Now using those recently validated reputations, these newly minted ones, to validate newly minted ones. So it becomes a recursive feedback loop. And some of the botnet operators are breaking into the 2 million to 5 million virtual identities on popular sites. Now, we're seeing the reputation of these types of virtual identities already being abused. So, stock trading, so being able to influence trading prices, free stuff accounts, sales ranking, so week before last, the abuse of iTunes, ensuring that popular applications appeared high up on the list by using those reputations and buying patterns. So what it means is that the online reputation and voting system becoming more and more important, and so the value of those is actually increasing. So while there is there's actually a sizable investment in actually building a botnet to be able to handle this type of identity fraud and information, it's become the value of those systems that rely on those identities has been growing, and so the ability to monetize those has been growing as well. Interesting enough, there's not an awful lot of information about how to prosecute from a fraud perspective. So generally, the stuff is about abuse of site terms, and prosecutions are going to be very difficult. So by building up those reputation systems, there are a lot of things that we're sort of seeing. So things like extortion on Craigslist. So buyers and sellers or people providing services on Craigslist are being approached by botnet operators, where they can effectively say, well, I can give you 100 positive endorsements for $20 per month. Or if you don't want to pay me, then I can give you 1,000 negative endorsements, and you're not going to be able to use that service anymore. And so it's a typical sort of, we'll break your windows if you don't pay type scams, and that's that now exists on many of these sites, purely because of the reputation that can be assigned and voted on, or comments that can be left behind. Betting agencies, so abuse of things like Dancing on the Stars, so online portals that are allow you to place bets on who's going to win this week's or tonight's Dancing with the Stars type thing. Being able to place a bet in a betting agency, but then being able to use your botnet to actually help vote out that particular person, so influencing the results there. So a lot of other ones there, but really making money. So racketeering is really the key area there, and so a lot of the focus at the moment it tends to be high, fairly high volume, but mainly targeted on small vendors, where the cost to these victims is somewhere between $20 and $100. So this isn't the victim computers, but this is people that rely on these types of services, such as Craigslist and eBay. Buying votes, so being able to use the most popular social networking platforms and all that, being able to buy those votes and virtual votes. The retail price seems to be, at the moment, about $100 per 1,000 identities that you're going to use for voting. So sort of rapidly wrap up here. So the business models are very, botnet building is actually very easy. It's plenty of tutorials. It doesn't take a genius to do this. The necessary skills for being able to build and construct your first botnet relies on two things. One is the knowledge on how to install a piece of software on your own machine, and the second piece of knowledge is how to use Google search. Okay. If you're competent in either of those two areas, you can start building your first botnets. Okay. Now, a lot of the work that's really going on today is building up long-term botnets and to keep those botnets running for the longest time possible. So there's been a massive move away from short-term, short-lived, high-volume types of attacks and things. So while we have, I mentioned about spam campaigns running and all this sort of stuff, specialized providers. It's not new starters in this area, and if you want to keep your botnet running for a longer time and using things such as, identity laundering type systems or reputation type systems to make real money from the botnets, then it has to be low and slow, and you don't want any of those types of noisy attacks because you'll get detected. Okay. So what are the biggest earners today? From the cash rewards, they're actually paying out as in real cash that you can retire on, as opposed to trying to figure out how to trade certain goods around. Short-term campaign building of botnets, so just building a botnet and selling it on to someone else. Being able to do that in an efficient model has the highest yield in the short term. Now, in the medium term, identity laundering. So being able to take the information that's harvested from those machines and from those victims, or the new victims and your old victims, and keeping that information fresh will generate high value. Longer term, I think the virtual reputation systems are probably going to be the most elegant way, I guess, of making real money. So, locating of the botnets, today tends to focus on the output from those botnets. So things such as spam, DDoS, and brute forcing types of things. It's very easy to identify the botnets that are actually doing that. So, dealing with those. But I think one of the key things, and sort of to end this really is about the bot master itself. So, let's be pretty clear about this. The probability that your botnet is legal is actually pretty high. But the thing is, if you're actually doing illegal stuff from your botnet, the probability of actually being detected is actually pretty high. Okay, and the probability that you could get caught is pretty high. But then again, it's not particularly guaranteed, and the folks that have been caught haven't really been successfully prosecuted yet. So with that, in the last few minutes, I'll open for any questions. Sure, question front. So, question related to why hasn't there been a wave of takedowns given some of the high-profile takedowns that have been there? Well, I think a couple of things. So one is that all the botnets are largely independent, and the modern way of running botnets is multiple campaigns, and they're all quite separate from each other. So you have multiple operators running multiple campaigns, selling and horse trading different sort of systems there. So it becomes much more difficult to provide attribution to particular operators. The other key part really is that, frankly, the laws don't really cover well this type of business and prosecution of botnet operators. So the successful prosecutions or attempts at prosecutions have not been about the botnets or the malware. They've been about the frauds and typically the credit card fraud and credit card transactions that are being used as a way of forcing sort of jail time. Many of the botnet operators don't actually go down that fraud route, so they're not worried about those types of prosecutions today. Any last questions before everyone pigs out for lunch? So, there's the one at the back there somewhere. Thanks, Sean. So, one last question before we'll get some lunch. That's a long question. So when it comes to so when it comes to a question perspective of providing attribution to the operators and the guys that are behind there. In many cases, a level of attribution is possible. Okay, certainly from my company, we do a lot of attribution to individual operators. However, much of that attribution, is multiple levels of identities that were traced back, and being able to provide that sort of level of attribution is fine for us, and may be useful from a name and shame publicly type perspective. But from a legal perspective, with the legal rigor and infringements on identity, on protection of identity information and things like that, means that it's not useful or not particularly useful for a court of law or for law enforcement. It becomes a lot more difficult in those cases. Like I mentioned at the start, most of the attribution to individual operators actually happens based on the things that they first did when they started setting up their first botnets. They learn from their lessons, and once you build a botnet on top of a botnet on top of a botnet, it becomes much more difficult. So you can't just take the current version of a particular botnet or piece of malware without understanding all the other dependencies. And those dependencies, that trail will lead back to the individual, but that requires a lot of historical information. And that's it starts getting a lot murkier about categorically saying what the affiliations are between them. So Spam House provided. I showed that picture of the top 10 spammers in the world. So Spam House provides that list for free with as much information as possible about them. It doesn't seem to have deterred them, and doesn't seem to have resulted in any prosecutions to date. So, well, that. Thank you all, and enjoy lunch, and I'll be around if anyone has any questions later. Thanks.